welcome everybody attending. I was looking forward to giving this presentation, and I hope that it's useful to you. I will keep it at a relatively high level for the time that we have, and because your particular business needs can be very different from other organizations, and we understand that every business is unique. So Apex App Dev does do custom applications, data integration, data warehousing, a whole manner of that kind of a technology and consulting that's related to it. And so, as Mike mentioned, my contact information, it will be available later. If you don't already have it, I know some of you do. So today, our agenda, we're going to look at typical current state for businesses that are trying to deal with the mass amount of data that they may have and they need access to, and then some problems that those businesses encounter. We'll envision a better future, a different solution that may help to deal with all that data. We'll look at a couple case studies, actual implementations that we developed recently that I think is informative and may sort of color a better picture for what data warehousing can offer you. And then we'll look at the simple design. And again, we'll keep this at a high level, but I think it'll dispel some of the uncertainty about what that is. If you have any questions, what is data warehousing and why does it matter to me, or could it matter to me? And then finally, some next steps that I think would be practical for any business to take. So let's get into the current state, which has to do with the challenges that I think many businesses have today. So what do we have? What's the business problem? We have a lot of software, accounting systems, CRM systems, inventory. I just included a few in my diagram here. Much of this, if not all of it, is business critical. You have information in all these systems that you want to access. You do access, but often you want to get that together. You want to marry that data to provide some key performance indicators that are relevant to your business, that help you make decisions. Yet these systems don't always talk to each other. You may need to push information from one system to another, and it's difficult to do that sometimes. And so we always have these kind of applications to deal with, and they may be difficult. So one of the workarounds that I find is pretty ubiquitous. Most businesses do some form of this. They export data into a spreadsheet. And then they spend countless hours copying and pasting and creating different pivot tables, maybe some other exports that are either pushed into another system, or they do some other slicing and dicing, or even create other reports that are important reports, but they're based on these spreadsheets. It can be a very tedious and time-consuming process. I'm sure a lot of you do that. In addition to that, other workarounds might include using reporting tools. Some of these reporting tools are actually pretty good, and we've seen them implemented and used effectively. Crystal Reports is one of those. Some of them are dangerous in some degree. Access comes to mind. A lot of companies will use Access because you can get data, you can put data in there, you can pull it from other data sources, and you can build reports. But Access has some problems when used on the enterprise level that I think a lot of companies don't recognize or realize, or maybe you're experiencing today. So I think I'd like to stop every once in a while in case there's a question related to the different topics that we're covering. And Mike, if you'll let me know at this point, are we having any questions or comments?
Nothing as of this time. So
okay.
I'll point it out as I see things pop up. I'll just
I'll do that. I'll do that from time to time to give everybody an opportunity, so I don't move too quickly from a topic. At any rate, okay, let's talk about why that current state is a potential problem. All these solutions could have one or many of these pitfalls. One of they're time consuming. If you think about spreadsheets, and I'm sure many of you have the situation where you pull data out of a system And then you have to manipulate that data. And it may be something you do every day. You might have situations where you have to reformat that data in order to push it into another system, in order to get the data into that. That's how you can talk. Those systems can talk. It's a manual process. These spreadsheets can become very complicated. They can become esoteric in that the person who created them might understand them after they're done. They might not, because even the degree of functions and complexity you can put into a spreadsheet can be pretty overwhelming, even for the person developing that. And that becomes a business risk, because then it's hard to change. It's hard to fix. These spreadsheets solutions become fragile. You can break them easily, and there again, they're hard to fix when they're fragile. Sometimes it takes too long. You dump things into a spreadsheet, or in this case, even a different database or reporting system like Access, where it takes a while to get the data in there. It takes a while to refactor the data and transform it into a useful schema. And so that data becomes stale. If you have to do this on a constant basis, then the metrics that you're looking for, it may take several days or a week or even longer to get. That's not very helpful in today's modern world. Some of these solutions are not scalable. This is one of the big problems with Access. And we see this not only with regards to numbers of concurrent users, but also with its complexity. Again, with spreadsheets, only so many people, well, in a lot of spreadsheets, you can only have a single user at a time. There are online spreadsheet kind of software, Smartsheets, for example, that do support multiple users, but they become difficult to scale out as your business grows. And if you have a solution, especially if you're getting some key metrics that you can't scale with your business, then you might find yourself in a situation where it's untenable. There's questions about security. Where are you storing spreadsheets? Where are you storing other applications that might consume that data, reports that you might produce? For a lot of companies that don't really understand how their security is set up, maybe you have shared drives, user drives, you might have network drives, and you can put data there, and it's really convenient to share that information. But is that really where you need all your sensitive data? It's a consideration, and it's often something that's not thought about in the moment when you're trying to pull out that information. So, and in some cases, that contributes to the data not being durable. And by durability, I mean, is it there today and tomorrow? So if users create information, even CFOs and C-level users who create data that's important, business critical, and sensitive, and put it in a shared drive, even if it's secure, sometimes people leave companies. Sometimes, for a variety of reasons. And when that happens, your IT provider, chances are they'll disable those accounts. That's the standard practice, and it's something that should be done. And then all of a sudden you have a situation where you can't access that data, especially if you shared it and it's being consumed by some other reporting tool or some other spreadsheet. That can be a big problem, and it can be something very difficult to discover and then to unwind. But all these kind of pitfalls, they're really the result of, I think, a system growing or a solution growing over time. When you first started out, you might not have had a problem. You pulled some data out of a spreadsheet, and okay, you got that, and you did some manipulating, and you got the information you needed, and you figure, well, I can do this from time to time and everything will be fine. And that may be true. And there are some cases where that is true. Spreadsheets are great for doing ad hoc analysis. And companies do that all the time. We put the capability of dumping data into spreadsheets into the applications we develop all the time, because it's very useful and it's a quick tool. It's when you have to have something on a regular basis, whether it's reporting information, dashboard information, KPIs, or when you're wanting to push that information into other systems, that those ad hoc solutions start to have these kinds of problems. That brings to mind another topic that's important when considering the current state, and that's technical debt. Technical debt is incurred when a technical decision, using a spreadsheet, using Access, using some other tool, is made today that you're going to have to fix tomorrow. Whether you knew you were going to have to fix it or not, you might not have known it. You might have known it. Sometimes businesses will do that. They realize, well, this isn't a great solution, but it's all I can do right now, so I'm going to do it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Technical debt, like any other kind of debt, could be good or could be bad. But it's important that you know that you're incurring that debt. And you also recognize that you will pay for it. You are going to pay an interest in the complexity, the time-consuming effort that's involved in maintaining that solution. Or you may pay for it in having to replace it at some time in the future when it becomes unscalable and doesn't work anymore because it's too broken to fix. So understanding that is important, which is why I say that any of those solutions, whether it's a spreadsheet or a reporting tool, they're not necessarily bad. They could have good implementations, but you do need to understand what your future holds and how your business is growing and whether or not that becomes a technical debt that is untenable. So any questions about at least what I'm talking about with regards to the current state and the kinds of problems that businesses might have? Do you have some of these kind of situations that you're realizing, oh gosh, I've got like, the same kind of processes and I hadn't really thought about it?
Nothing as of yet.
Okay, well, let us know if you do have any of those kind of questions. We'd like to hear it. I like the interaction. So let's talk about what do we do? What's a better future? How can we sort of get out of the pitfalls that we might be in, or maybe avoid them to begin with, so that we don't have to incur either the technical debt or some of the problems that come with it? Well, what I want to automate everything and just give me the data I want today. That's really what I want to do. That's pie in the sky somewhat. But the reality is I know I have data in different places. So I just need some process that will pull all that data out and then push it where it needs to go in other systems or into some report or dashboard to give me the information I want. And don't I just want to have that happen and not have to do all the extra work and have it work all the time? Yeah, that's what I want. Everybody knows that. Well, so that's in a nutshell what data warehousing and business intelligence reporting does for us, or it certainly can do. So here's this diagram again of all my systems. What I want to do, I want to ingest all that data into a central place. That's a data warehouse. I may need to transform it into some format that makes sense to me. Maybe my EMR system or my ERP system has it organized in a way that it doesn't really lend well to reporting. And I know I'm going to do that, so I'm going to transform it. And that way I can build reports that make sense and make the reporting a lot easier to do. I want to automate that. I don't want to have to do it by hand. So this should happen on a schedule or automatically when certain things happen inside those systems. Some systems do provide those kind of what they call webhooks or some sort of events system or messaging system where you can consume data right away. Often systems don't. You have to set up a process on a schedule. But you can do a schedule pretty frequently. And so you can get real-time data or very close to real-time data. And by doing it through a system, an automated system, then you can ensure consistency because it's set up the way it needs to be set up from the beginning. And therefore, it's not going to be fragile. It's not going to break. And it's going to be very durable because you're setting it up on the back end, not dependent on some user. You can do a lot better job of securing those connections and securing that data because now it's actually in a database that is governed by some sort of security system, and as well as your reporting platform. You can secure that, and that can be very helpful, especially if you're in a compliance situation where you have to secure that data and may have to provide evidence of that. So that's the big picture of data warehousing. Let's look at some case studies. Any case study, well, the case studies I've done here, I've got a couple, and I've simplified them. One of them to a large degree in order to make use of them in this presentation, but these are actual implementations that we have done over the last few years that I think will be informative. So the first case study doesn't quite look like a data warehouse, or the solution doesn't, but it really is. And I think it represents a very typical problem. So we had a client, and there were essentially 3 systems involved in their current state. They had a work order system that produced work orders with invoices for work done that they needed to send out to their clients. They create an invoice for. They had to take that information, and the only way they could use it was to dump it into a spreadsheet and manipulate that information. They also printed those work orders, invoices. Once they're in that spreadsheet, they had to generate another spreadsheet that was suitable for their AR system, their accounts receivable system, so they could import that data. And it wasn't exactly the same data. They had to manipulate it. They had to summarize it in order for it to work in the structure they had for their accounting. So then they would take the printed work order, and they would take a printed invoice from the accounting system, and they would collate those together per customer, and they had quite a few of them, and then scan them into the various documents. This was sort of a combined invoice, and they needed that because they had to send that to an expense management system, which is what they used for approving payments or validating those invoices. So this was fairly complicated, time-consuming, very manual. Somebody had to plug in some cases, type in the data, the summary data in the first step of the spreadsheets. And so you can see it would has a very high chance of breaking down. And so the final step, as you can see, they had to pray that it all worked. Because if they had a mistake early in the process, they'd have to go back and redo most of the process in order to correct that mistake. That was a problem. So how did we fix that? Well, a data warehouse. We could get the data. We already had a way to do that. That was simple enough. Their AR system and expense management system supported a couple different integration methods. The AR system had an API. The expense management system required an email, but we could automate all that. In our original design for this system, we had sort of an easy button solution because it did have to happen at a certain time when they were ready for it to happen, because they were waiting for upstream events to happen that we couldn't detect. And so I proposed an easy button because the whole thing could be automated and just happen. In this particular case, they decided they wanted to review at least one of those steps where they could detect problems. So we built a little application. It's a web-based application that allowed them to review not only the data coming out of their work order system, but the transformations that we made to that data, the summary of that data. And we found when we did this, we could detect problems for them. So they didn't have to go through the effort of recognizing those problems. It's when somebody made a mistake on the work order, they entered something incorrectly, they coded it incorrectly, they did something that was easily for us to identify, and so we flagged it. So the person who was responsible for this process could just look and see, oh, there's a problem here. I need to reach out to that person so they can correct it. And then we can re-import the data. And that's very automatic, very little effort involved. And once that's done, it was an easy button. They clicked a button and we generated the invoices they needed in the AR system, the invoices they needed for the expense management system, which was a more detailed one, and sent them on their way. And that process has been very solid for several years now. Not a very complicated process, but it does have some nuances that are very difficult to handle manually. Thoughts about this solution? Does that sound familiar to any processes that you might have today?
I think we're nothing as of yet.
So the other case study, this one I simplified a lot because it was actually very complicated. This company had multiple sites where they did sales. So they had point of sale systems. They had a lot of sites. They had when we started about 60 sites. And so they had, I represented 2 systems. They actually had 3. And so what they had to do on a daily basis, each point of sale system had a vendor application. And they had to log into these applications for each site and pull out the data. Now, the systems themselves would provide them reports, but if you have 60 reports, it's really hard to work with. If you want to know from on a corporate level what sales look like and some other information related to that, operational data. So some guy would have to sit there and plug in some data into a spreadsheet. And he could do it. That's pretty much all he did. And he spent all day plugging that data in so that they could get that information. Then he took that data and he actually used an Access database to generate some reports. That Access database also pulled in some spreadsheets with non-system data. And by non-system data, I mean data that doesn't exist in any application. It was only in a spreadsheet, but they needed it. It was important, so they had to import it. And I have something to say about potential solutions for that kind of information. You might think sales projections, that a feature wasn't supported in their point of sale systems. And so they would create these reports either from Access or directly from the spreadsheets. So a lot of data crunching. Certainly not a scalable solution, and a very fragile solution for that matter, with regards to the Access reporting. So what did we do? Well, we automated it. We built a data warehouse. And in this particular case, we had different methods for getting the data because one of the systems required an API call. We built a process to pull the data that way. Another system, we could connect directly to the database. So we used Azure Data Factory, which is a cloud-based platform for pulling and manipulating data, ETL processes. And that pushed all the data into a data warehouse where we could reformat the data. We could aggregate the data, especially, which was very important because they're working with so many sites. The number of sites went to 150 very quickly in a year or two after we started. We still had some non-system data we had to pull, and that's a problem we haven't fixed yet, but we will. And then we took that data once it's in the data warehouse, and well, I should say they did this. They built Power BI reports. Many of you probably are familiar with Power BI or even use Power BI. It's a cloud-based reporting tool. It's very useful and very effective, but can also be very dangerous if you're not careful with how you use it. It's some of the problems that Access has. You can have the same problems in Power BI. So we recommend being thoughtful about how you use Power BI. And by using a data warehouse, you simplify the reporting process. And so that's what we did. And so they generate dozens and dozens of reports based on basically one set of data in their data warehouse. And this company continues to grow way beyond what a manual process could support. And it's been a very effective tool. So let's take a look at on a high level basis. What are the components we need in a data warehouse? And then I wanted to sort of share with you our vision for how that is typically implemented or could typically be implemented depending on your needs. So you have databases, you might have some spreadsheets or other sources of data. It could be files, flat files. Sometimes that just exists and that's what you have. You might have some APIs that you need to connect to other sources. An example, we pulled in weather data. It was relevant to some of their company's planning, and so we pulled data from a weather API. That could be useful information. And so you can do that. You have some sort of ETL or ELT process. The difference just depends on when you transform the data. But it's an automated process. It pulls that data in on a schedule, however often you need to do that, and pushes it into a data warehouse. So you've got you already have the database in the data sources. If you don't have a data warehouse, you're missing the database that is the data warehouse and the processes involved. So really, you just have those two processes that have to be set up and configured. And then you have reports. And the reports could come in the form of actual reports like you would get from Power BI, or it could come in the form of a dashboard. You might create a web application that shows real-time data, the KPIs that you're interested in. and that might have some relevance throughout the day. So there's lots of different options for how you visualize the data in your data warehouse. And once it's there, then you can think of things and look at things that you haven't thought about before because it just wasn't available. You couldn't get that information, but now it's in the data warehouse. You could do ad hoc reporting as well, which can be very useful for people who do analytics. You might have some people in your company that need to do that on occasion. So for Apex, we use this platform. This is an Azure platform. Many of you are using Office 365 today, and if you are, you may not realize you already have an Azure presence. It's already there, and Microsoft obviously provides Azure. There's lots of features, and I can't even begin to iterate the number of features that could be involved in just a data warehouse, let alone all the other capabilities that it provides. So Data Factory, I mentioned earlier, is one of the tools for pulling in data and transforming data. It's an automated cloud-based platform. It's fairly easy to set up once you connect it to the different data sources. Connecting to the data sources may be difficult depending on the nature of those sources, but it can be set up and then automated on a schedule or triggered somehow. That it pushes into a database we like to use, Azure SQL. This is a serverless platform. It could be on an on-premise server or a server in the cloud, but we often find that it's simpler just to set up a serverless database. It can scale and pretty large, so that there's plenty of space, and it can scale automatically, or you can manage that very easily. So it's not like your on-premise databases where you run out of disk on a drive. Now you've got to get somebody to replace that drive or add another drive, and that can take time and consume a lot of money. For scaling a online database is usually a click of a button. It does cost, but those are your regular recurring costs. And then we use Power BI quite often. There are some other solutions that may be applicable. But Power BI is, again, it's cloud-based. It connects well to SQL. And by providing a single source of data, we can make those reports very simple. And that's a good solution. This is not that difficult to set up. Does take some technical skills. But once you've got the nuts and bolts of the data factory and the data warehouse together, the reporting becomes really a business tool. You can have, if you have a large implementation, the last case study I mentioned, they actually had a Power BI reporter on their team internally who did all the reports and spends most of his day doing the reporting because that's what their needs are. So that's very much easier to reach than some of the other solutions, manipulating a spreadsheet or building an access solution or those kind of possibilities that I think a lot of companies are trying because they're familiar. So I mentioned I wanted to get rid of some spreadsheets. And this is a simple starting point, I think, for companies where you do have a spreadsheet and you feel like, well, this is not a good solution. Having the spreadsheet here is not maybe it's non-system data. It doesn't exist anywhere else. I had to put in a spreadsheet, but I want to report on it. And it's really difficult to get to that data. So we recommend move that into a database. Suppose it's Azure SQL. And then you can build a web interface fairly quickly, fairly easily. There's a couple different tools in which you can do that or have somebody do that for you so that you can manage that information. But by having this data, instead of in a spreadsheet, in a database, your reporting becomes a lot simpler. You can secure it a lot better. You can maintain it. It becomes very durable. The complexity might still be there, but you can make a database a lot more complicated than a spreadsheet and not really raise the complexity. Take some design work, but it can be done. And then you're in a much better situation. You've avoided a lot of different pitfalls. So any questions about data warehousing and what that is and how that might look?
Rick, I I was curious when you talked about some of these, and I know this is probably going to vary, but in terms of time frame that it would take to implement your your standard program, and again, there's a lot of variables I realize, but can you give us just some ideas of what you have experienced in terms of turnaround time on projects that, like such as this?
Well, it does matter greatly what the data sources look like and what the output is. But a lot of these starting points, such as setting up a data factory, say you have some databases, even on-premise databases like an on-premise SQL Server. Um, Setting that up is something that could be done in a couple days. Writing queries maybe takes longer to transform the data into a format that you want. Building a database takes some more time. Setting up the actual database is nothing. It's very easy to do that in Azure. Like I said, if you've got Office 365, you're already in Azure. Even if you didn't, it doesn't cost anything to set up a Azure presence, although I do recommend your IT provider help you with that to make sure it's set up securely and in a way that you can use proper security measures. So the basics are not that complicated. If we were to set up, say, just give you the infrastructure, this could be a 1 week project. That doesn't give you any reports, and it might not give you the data yet, but it's a good starting point. Then it just depends on how complicated the data is and what kind of connections you have to make. There again, connecting to an existing relational database like SQL Server or some online versions of a database is fairly straightforward. Other sources like APIs, a bit more difficult to work with. And certainly there are some systems that just have very antiquated methods of connecting, in which case we can work around that, but those workarounds can be complicated. So, it can be something you can start with a small budget and get going, and then see how it sort of plays out, or it's something you can dive into. I think that conversations about what your particular business problems are would have to be had. And so we could scope out and figure out, well, is this requiring a big solution or a small solution? What does it look like?
Right.
And that's the sort of consulting services that Apex App Dev can provide.
Right, right. Well, like you said, there's a lot of tools that a lot of our folks have access to that they just haven't had the time to delve into and to understand. So, I think that the resource of you being able to kind of point them in the right direction, utilize some of those things, implement some of those things that they may have access to,
Right.
so can speed up the process. But all right, great. Anybody else have any other questions while we're in a little chat here? Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you go on there.
All right. So we're kind of hitting on next steps as far as I see it. And I want to emphasize something important is many of you, if you've sort of thought about the points I was making about pitfalls, especially with regards to spreadsheets, because I know most of you out there do something with spreadsheets, and it may not be a bad thing, but it might be. Regardless of what you plan to do in the future, look at your current state, identify those inefficiencies and the risks. What are the business risks involved in the process you have, and document it. If you have it documented, then you've at least made some of that complexity and certainly the esoteric nature of those kind of solutions less of a problem. Do at least that, and then then you have something to work with, and you can say, well, is this something I need to pursue or not? You can consider engaging Apex App Dev for guidance or for a complete solution. I'd be happy to have a conversation just to look at the situation and give you some recommendations. That's something we can do pretty easily. Once you've done that, whether or not you're using Apex App Dev, come up with a smart plan, a plan that you can reasonably implement in phases in such a way that you don't have to take the large steps that are really too big to take. And identify the urgent problems, urgent business risks, urgent inefficiencies that's really costing you because you haven't done something. And that's something we would do as well. You don't have to build the whole solution at once. You can build it in pieces. And of course, execute that plan in reasonable phases. So with that, I think that concludes the presentation. Great. I appreciate everybody's attention. And I've on the screen now is my contact information. If anybody wishes to reach out, and I think Mike, you're going to send that as well.
Yeah. Yes. Let me actually. We do have a question that came in here. We have a question: what governance frameworks must be in place to maintain data privacy and compliance while enabling autonomous business processes?
Well, so that's going to depend on what your particular needs are. With regards to compliance, different industries have different rules, and we don't necessarily bring that knowledge. That's something we would depend on our clients to tell us, okay, we have these considerations. And in a cloud-based environment, it may matter where you put those components, where you put a data factory, where you put your database. Although for the most part, domestic clients, we're building things on the eastern U.S. Region in Azure, which averts pretty much any of those kind of problems. Sometimes we may have a European client or a client that uses some has some sites out in Europe, and maybe there's some other considerations, although I haven't really encountered that yet. And so with that in mind, when you do create these data warehouse solutions, you do it within what they call a tenant. And a tenant is a secure environment inside of the cloud. If you were using AWS or Google Cloud, they have the same kind of concept. And so that can be locked down with firewalls. It can be locked down with credentials to secure it, just like a on-premise network. And so by doing it that way, the only real concern that you'd have as far as preserving that data, preserving the security for that data, is how much you're actually having to reach out. But it certainly can be done in a secure way and an isolated way. So you're essentially isolating the whole process, depending on whether or not. Well, if you're having to pull data from another cloud platform because that's the application, that's fine. You've already got that out there, but you can still secure that pipeline so that and that would be the default. We would do that in a secure way and encrypted everything. In fact, most data is encrypted in Azure, both at rest and while it's moving.
All right, great. Thank you for that question. Is there anybody else before we wrap it up here? Any other questions that we might have? Like I said, I know that there's a lot of things you might be thinking of there, and what I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email that has this presentation along with a little survey link that I mentioned, and you can ask any specific questions in there as well. We do have one last thing. We are going to give away the $100 Visa gift card, and I appreciate all you guys sticking around and being with us today. And let me just go through here. We have a number of folks here today, so let me just do we have this random system here that I kind of use. And all right, Chris Schenker. Chris, congratulations. We will be getting in touch with you and sending you over a $100 Visa gift card. And don't worry, for those of you that did not receive the gift, did not win the gift card, we will be sending out this survey. Like I said, if you fill out the survey, we will actually give you a cup of coffee from Starbucks. So we appreciate you guys being here and participating. I think that's it. All right, cool. That's it for today. And like I said, check our site for upcoming events. Register for or sign up for our notifications on our blogs and our upcoming events. And we hope that this was helpful. We hope that you get some utilization out of this, and we'll be in touch with you guys soon. And thanks again for showing up. Rick, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Take care, guys.